Simplicity and directness is a great way to break through the noise in a market where we are all suffering from information overload. And it doesn't matter how technical your product is, the simpler and clearer you can be in your messaging, the better it's going to resonate.
There are secrets out there, guys, performance marketing secrets, and knowing just one or two of them can absolutely light up your funnels. Let's go. This is the Revenue Driven CMO. I'm your host, Chris Mechanic. Join me as I uncover the secrets of the world's most elite CMOs and marketing leaders. The Revenue Driven CMO is sponsored by Web Mechanics, the AI-driven performance agency that makes you smarter. Hey, everybody, welcome to another exciting episode of Revenue Driven CMO. I am your man, Chris Mechanic, here with a really exciting guest tonight. This guy is a legend in the marketing space in general, but especially in cybersecurity. So he was awarded Cybersecurity Marketer of the Year in 2024. He is a senior executive with many years of experience. He's got, a well-rounded style, which you're going to learn about in a second, but he's an investor. He's a board member, really just focused on driving growth and innovation across analytics, security, and cloud. Currently serving as Chief Marketing Officer at Gigamon, which is a really exciting company that we'll learn more about here. But ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Mr. Karl Van Den Bergh. How are you, Karl?
Thanks. Great. Yeah, great. Thanks. Great to be here and and looking forward to the conversation.
Me too, man. Me too. I mean, we previewed it a little bit before the call, but we like to just go straight for the value and lead with it. So why don't you let everybody know, like, what is one of your big secrets to success in marketing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for me, it is simplicity and specifically, I would say smart simplicity. So what do I mean by that? No surprise to your audience, marketers out there, that we're dealing with a world of information overload. And so one of the big questions for marketers often is, how do you break through the noise?
Yeah.
And, the way that I think about it is, if you can get really focused on figuring out how to boil down your value proposition in terms that are as simple, clear, straightforward as possible,
Yeah.
the better you'll do. And, this is, I'm not inventing anything here. This is, if many of your audience may be familiar with Reese and Trout, kind of the marketing gurus have written many classic books, and one of their books is Positioning, called Positioning.
Yeah.
And, they recommend it. I mean, if you can get it down to one word, now that's probably ambitious for the world that we live in, especially the technical world.
Yeah.
But, what is that one word that people will associate with your brand? I think famously, you think about Volvo, the car, and safety is a good example of that.
Yeah.
That if you can do that, that's the gold standard. Now, bar that, getting it as simple as possible using, analogies, which is another way of making it easy for people to understand the value proposition. And I think we fall into the trap as technical marketers and sort of tech B2B.
Yeah.
Even though technology in the product is complicated, we feel that sometimes we have to make the explanation, the message complicated. And that really couldn't be further from the truth. Even if your audience is very technical, making it simple doesn't mean making it simplistic. It makes it easier to digest.
I absolutely agree with you on that. And it's this delicate balance, right? Because you want it to be understandable to the masses. But of course, in the world of cyber, or in a world of enterprise B2B, you're not selling to the masses, right? You're selling to a very niche and well-educated market in general. But you also have to toe this line between the different decision makers and the different influencers in those sales, right? And some of them do want that technical information. So I'm curious about, I totally agree with you that simple is better. analogies work. And like, if you can associate yourself and your brand with, uh, just simply solving a problem. I can't remember what brand it was, but somebody came out with like just simply better home security. I think it might have been
Yeah.
Vivint or something. But how do you toe that line? Like, how do you, sort of weed through or wade through rather the various decision makers and like, because some people do want that technical. So how do you sort of,
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think for, for me, the way that I think about it is it's where you start. It's not necessarily where you end, because I think you got to start at a high level, and then you want your audience to be curious enough to ask to learn more.
yeah.
So you basically, with the simple initial message, is you get the right to have a follow-on conversation.
Mhm.
But if you try to overload that first initial conversation with too much detail, you're going to lose your audience, and you're obviously, again, not going to get that opportunity. So it really is kind of a layered conversation. I think if the simple message is the tip of the spear, if you will, in furthering the dialogue.
Yeah. And so at what point in your career did this become clear to you? Like, was it, because I see you were at SAP, you were at Jaspersoft, did some time at Tibco. Like, at what point did this sort of become an epiphany for you that like, hey, we need to lead with this simple but maybe not too simple message?
You know, I think the if I go back to where I started my career, so I have a like technical background. So I started my career as an engineer, software developer,
Mhm.
and then decided to make that transition to marketing. I got the opportunity. I was actually working out of Paris, France, as my first
Yeah.
startup. Funny place to start, but that's where I started my career. And, in this startup, I got to transition from being a developer to being a marketer because I spoke English and they were breaking into the American market. So
Wow.
because I could speak English is like, hey, can you help us with marketing?
Yeah.
Uh, so I think and I was interested in making that transition because I felt that where some of my interests and, perhaps my skill lay was in translating a technical world to a, business value proposition.
Yeah.
And in that translation, uh, really, if you put yourself in the minds of the buyer, the buyer is trying to solve a problem. They're not trying to buy a technology per se. They're really trying to solve a
Yeah.
problem. And so if you can, somebody famously said, people aren't looking for, a whatever 16 millimeter drill bit. They're looking to make a, 16 millimeter hole in their wall. So the drill and the drill bit solves that problem. But the problem is they're trying to get a hole in the wall, right? So the same thing for me when I was looking and I'm making that transition from obviously being a developer to being a marketer. It was, I really need to think about technology differently. And the best way to think about it is from the shoes, from standing in the shoes of the buyer and what do they really care about? And they care about solving a problem. And so the faster you can translate what you do into how it solves for that problem, the better. And, in a world, as I said, of information overload, and that's just continued to get worse and worse, right? Is when this digital explosion, because when I started, it was still, that was certainly fairly nascent. Um, you can't afford but to be simple and clear, because you just won't get a lot of time to kind of drill into the details, but you'll lose people. The attention span is so low right now.
Well, I'm looking at Gigamon's site. I want to talk about Gigamon. I don't want to like read out what it says on the site because it might be not current or whatever. But I like the messaging, right? And I want to know how you think about, because a lot of companies in the the stratosphere or the classification of Gigamon are about category creation, right? So it's almost like creating this new language, which by definition, like requires some explanation or isn't maybe all that simple as like, hey, we're going to put a 16 millimeter hole in the wall, right? So how do you think about that? Like, are you guys in the category creation camp? And if so, how do you, kind of, how do you balance that with the simplicity in messaging?
Yeah, it's a tough one. And we made the decision a few years ago to create a category. And that's not something you take lightly as a marketer, because that means, a lot of time and a lot of
Yeah.
investment. Now, it really, I wouldn't say it should be your last stop, or your last resort, but it definitely is something you want to weigh carefully, because of what I said.
Yeah.
So the reason that we decided to go down that path, and we were, I think we were nuanced about it. It wasn't like completely net new. What we did was we took an emerging category, which was observability, and we decided to carve out a new sort of a niche within
Yeah.
observability, what we call deep observability. And so we were leveraging sort of momentum around this emerging category, but then saying, hey, we've got some complementary, not competitive, but complementary capabilities, which we call deep observability. For the audience who, likely doesn't know what deep observability is, and what Gigamon does, just briefly, we are, and I often start this way, we said, we're not a security tool. We are a layer between your hybrid cloud infrastructure and your security tool and your network performance management tool. And that layer, which we call our deep observability pipeline, ensures that a few things, but it ensures that the tools get to see everything on the network, because it's not easy, and we can go into it later if we need to, without the layer that we provide. It makes the data going to the tools, it streamlines the data going to tools, so the tools only get to see the data that they need to see.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, it helps reduce cost and it removes blind spots from the network. And obviously, you can't secure what you can't see. And so a big part, and that's often the tip of the spear when, back to your question about simplicity messaging, you see our brand campaign, and we kind of do a funny take on different scenarios. But basically, the message in the brand campaign is we remove blind spots. We remove things that you can't see. As I said, you can't manage, you can't secure what you can't see. And so that's kind of the core value proposition in the security world of what the deep observability pipeline provides.
Well, I like that you guys take a humorous, I mean, you sort of use humor in in various spots that I've seen.
We do, yeah, and we're about to, I don't know when we'll publish this podcast, but we're about to launch a refresh of our brand campaign. But back to the, what we said earlier about the kind of information overload and breaking through the noise. Humor can be a very effective way of doing that. It's always a little bit risky because, you'll either, you can like it or not like it. In fact, our very first brand campaign, which we started to kind of initially create category, was a little bit controversial. And, purposefully, I pushed the team to say, bring me something, because I wanted to kind of push the boundaries. Bring me something I'm going to say no to. I wanted to get them to the point where they would get me to say no. And we nearly got there with this first iteration. It's basically a whole bunch of people walking around an office with no pants on. And so you can understand why, that might be a little bit challenging. But it was very well done. That was a very successful campaign. And basically the idea, again, using the analogy, they were walking around oblivious to the fact that they didn't have pants on, right? And the message was, don't get caught with your pants down, right?
Yeah.
So there's a great way of kind of getting this idea. There's things that you can't see that could get you into trouble,
Yeah.
and we can help with that.
I love that.
So I would say simplicity and directness is a great way to break through the noise in a market where we are all suffering from information overload. And it doesn't matter how technical your product is, the simpler and clearer you can be in your messaging, the better it's going to resonate.
Hey, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, Web Mechanics will do 10 to 20 hours of work for you for free. Literally no sales calls, no BS. Just give them a problem and they will put a team to work for you for free for 10 to 20 hours, even if you're already a client. If you're struggling with demand gen, lead gen, SEO, SEM, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, conversion optimization, if you can't get Facebook or Meta ads to work for the life of you, or you can't figure out attribution, Web Mechanics will take a good hard look at whatever problem you give them, whatever programs you put in front of them, and they will give you an objective, informed opinion, plus some advice from 10 to 20 hours of senior level attention. So I would suggest take them up on this offer. It's ridiculous. Go to revenuedrivencmo.com/free, fill out the 2-minute form, and you will not regret it. Literally zero downside, unlimited potential for growth. So do yourself a favor, revenuedrivencmo.com/free, no hyphens, no punctuations. You will be happy about that decision. I love that. And now, and the story that I'll couple that with is basically walking around with no pants on, right? In a cybersecurity world where you're just walking around leisurely throughout the office and you don't have any pants on, but you're not fully aware that you don't have any pants. That's funny. That would get my attention. You could run that as a Super Bowl commercial probably, and it would be.
Yeah, no, it was done in that kind of spirit of, I think the most successful Super Bowl commercials are the ones that people laugh at, right? They find funny. And so the first one we did was pants down. The refresh we did in that, which is the current one, is what we call bad guys in the system. And it's basically different office scenarios where the, office workers are oblivious to the fact that there's this hacker in their midst, and we can see the hacker, and the hacker is wreaking all sorts of havoc, like, the elevators are malfunctioning, or they're recording a confidential conversation, or they're, diverting funds, or they're posting stuff on social media from the CEO that is from his personal account. So there's all these things that are happening, and we can see the hacker right there, and the audio or the office workers can. So that's the current one, and we have a new one that's coming out, and it's the teaser is it's hair on fire, and so we literally have someone walking around with their hair on fire.
And are they aware of that, or this?
They're not aware. And they're setting off, fire alarms, and, people are staring at them. It's the IT guy. Basically, it's, you don't want to end up with your hair on fire. And so, again, it's a great new take on this problem of things that you can't see are going to hurt you.
I think it's really smart the way you guys are doing it. You're taking this very complex technical product and you're boiling it down to the most basic units, which are that there might be dangers that you're unaware of. And that seems to be sort of a theme, like on your website, I see there's like a meeting going on and then there's a guy with a hoodie on, like in the corner. So, like, you might be unaware of that, right?
Yeah. The ironic thing is that's the reality. We know that, in the world of assumed breaches, that there are, very likely, hackers in the system, and we're just unaware of it, right? And we did and it's an annual now hybrid cloud security survey report, 1,000 IT and CISOs, security professionals around the world, and a significant number of those professionals don't learn about a breach until there's something on the dark web, or, something bad happens. They're just unaware.
Yeah.
And it's the reality of the world we live in. And so a big part of our what we're saying is, you've got to be able to see what's going on in your network. I mean, that's the basic thing. You got to see what's going on in the network. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to catch and contain what's likely already there, because the dwell time of a lot of these attacks is like, months. It's not like they're, and that's how ransomware and other types of attacks can be so devastating, is because they're in the system for a while and they're propagating, often, by the way, through encrypted traffic. So it looks like it's safe, but malware, 90+% of malware is now encrypted. And so it's just transitioning around the network, doing damage, and none of the tools are aware, because they can't see it inside the encrypted traffic. And that's actually something else that our deep observability pipeline helps with. It allows you to see encrypted traffic without decrypting. And, we can talk about that later if you're interested, but it is a breakthrough technology, which we announced last year.
So let's talk about Gigamon. You've been there, it looks like, for about 5 years.
Yeah.
Heard of them, right? And I've heard of, we've worked with cyber company. I'm relatively familiar with the space. I know that it's hot and it's growing. I'm an investor in the space, right? It's one of these things that everybody needs. And still, it feels like early in the cycle where, the large companies are aware of it. The enterprise is aware of it. Even out of the mid-market is aware of it. The smaller companies need it, right? And these hackers are just so innovative, There's a
Yeah.
part of me, I wish I could hire one of them to be like ethical hacker and to help
Yeah.
us with our stuff, but they're just so smart and so cunning, and they strike, just so unexpectedly and with such force, and can literally shut a company down, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen that
Yeah.
happen. They've shut hospitals down. They've shut colleges and universities and airlines even. Like, it's really kind of scary, right? But where does tell us a little bit about Gigamon in that ecosphere? Like, where do you guys fit in, and sort of who do you work with? Who are you good for?
Yeah. It's a good question. So yeah, we're kind of a little bit unique in the sense that, we were a startup that's no longer a startup. So we've actually been around for 20 years, if you can believe it, which is a long time in tech space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 20 years of innovation. We have like 150 patents. We're a global company. It's sort of mid-sized, about $500 million in revenue, based in Silicon Valley. And as I mentioned earlier, we're not a tool. So we actually partner with pretty much all security tools and all network performance. We have kind of two sides, with like security and network performance. And our value proposition, as I mentioned, is that kind of layer in between the hybrid cloud infrastructure. So we and the security and network performance management and cloud, tool. And when I say layer, what does that mean? It's a combination of either hardware appliances, which is where we started, and increasingly just software, cloud-based software that people can deploy.
Mhm.
So, and that forms a fabric or a pipeline, right? That's got seamless across the hybrid cloud. So we, when the tools plug into our fabric or our pipeline, they can very easily, as I said, see everything that's going on in the network. So what does that mean? That the sort of the network has gotten very complex. So obviously it started as a data center, branched into virtual infrastructure, to public cloud and all its flavors, to containers, right? To unmanaged devices, to the types of traffic like encrypted traffic. So being able to see into all of that through a single, really sort of single interface,
Mm.
is takes, as I said, a lot of innovation and technology. And so we've been doing that for 20 years. And I would say we have our, uh, where we started around network performance management and then moved into security. We sell typically to very large organizations. So you could name any large enterprise or government body around the world,
Yeah.
and they're very likely to be a Gigamon customer. We have nearly 90% of the Fortune 100,
Wow.
70% of the Fortune 500. So pretty much any brand you would be aware of and any government agency that you would interact with or aware of would be a Gigamon customer.
So help
And
us
so,
understand sort of the stat. So like, let's take a random large company, call it Salesforce, right?
Yep.
So Salesforce.com, they invest a lot in cybersecurity, right? They've got their network. They've probably got large teams of in-house cybersecurity. They probably got outsourced experts. They
Yep.
probably got ethical hackers on their team, right? Like, where does Gigamon sit in?
Right, right, yeah, yeah. So we would be deployed as part of the hybrid cloud network.
Mhm.
So we're deployed, like, and I said, you'd have appliances in the network rack somewhere. You'd have our software deployed on your AWS or your Google Cloud or wherever, right? So just think of it as that's how you go and deploy it.
Mhm.
And then your security tools, instead of pulling data directly from the network, they would pull it from our appliances or our software,
Mhm.
right? They would through an API. And so the benefit, as I said, is then they get like suddenly they can see everything as opposed to just the part of the network that they've tapped into. And they only get the data that they need to get. Because as you know, a lot of the organizations are spending millions, tens of larger ones, tens of million on tools.
Mhm.
And these tools have a certain amount of capacity. And when they run out of capacity, because data is not getting smaller, they have to upgrade. And so what we help do is reduce duplicate traffic on the network. So you're not seeing like the same thing twice.
Right.
You're only getting the relevant traffic. So there's certain things like, Netflix traffic is a good example, or Spotify that, no tool needs to really look at, right? So there are things like that. We just filter all of that out.
So it's like a curated view, really.
Basically, it's curate. You can do like, if you've got PII, we can do like masking of data. So you only see the data that you need to see and you're authorized to see. So it's basically, as you said, curating the data so you can see a complete picture, but only things that you need to see. And that makes the tools a lot more efficient and a lot more effective at what they do. And so organizations save a ton of money with in fact, our products are, we're kind of known as the Rolls Royce, and it's good and bad of the industry. So they're not cheap, but their ROI is in like 6 months or less. You get payback on like the $2 million or whatever that you spend. You get payback.
Yeah.
Because you're saving in many other ways.
And is the saving, did that come in the form of time saving and effort saving?
Yeah. So it's a great question. So there's some real hard savings. So it's not just like a soft ROI, but the hard savings are, you don't have to upgrade tools, right? So and you've got budgeted, in my budget, I'm going to have to upgrade because of capacity, right? Or my tools. The other thing is that tool can't handle the volume on the network, and we help make sure that tool can get just the for speed that they need. We can down regulate the speed for the tools. So basically, you don't have to upgrade your tool, right, at the same pace. That's a hard saving. It becomes a lot easier to manage the network. So you actually have, time savings or people savings, because you don't have to like have people running around plugging stuff in and out of the network. And then, when it comes to cloud, as we know, cloud is great, but it can be actually quite expensive, especially when you're moving data around. And so we've drastically reduced the amount of data being moved around. So we had for example, a large global footwear retailer, let's say that, who did a project, moving to AWS, and they had some data that they were egressing to their NDR, network detection response tool. Which wasn't cloud enabled, so they had to backhaul it.
Yeah.
They got their AWS bill. It was $10 million for that data egress, and so we reduced that by to about 5% of that original cost. And so because we were significantly reduce what the data is that needs to get moved around. So there's some real hard cost saving, and that's why the ROI is so substantial and so fast.
So you're saying they saved 5% or they saved like 90?
95%. Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, interesting. So you guys do you characterize yourself more in like the cybersecurity realm of things or more in like the cloud infrastructure?
Yeah, it's more cyber. So the way that our primary, like if you think of our executive buyer would be a CISO. We're doing a lot of work. So we're a foundational pillar to zero trust, because one of the foundational pillars to zero trust is network level visibility. In fact, we were part of, and we have a published case study with the Department of Defense where they did a project Dreamport, which is one of the first instantiations of the zero trust architecture that the government did.
Yeah.
And so we were part of that Dreamport project to make that zero trust architecture a possibility.
Wow.
And so CISOs are kind of our economic buyer, our primary economic buyer.
Yeah. And zero trust, for listeners that are not aware, and I'm also really not that aware, but I believe that that's sort of the gold standard in cybersecurity, sort of like network security, and there's a lot of implications for how you're managing your accounts, how you're managing your teams, and what.
Yeah, it's kind of an architectural approach that started about, I guess, 12 years ago, and it was it's gained traction, in particular in the federal government, and now this has become a mandate in the federal government, and all of the departments need to adopt a zero trust architecture. And so now it's bleeding into the enterprise because all of the vendors that do business with the government need to start adopting this. So it's really becoming a bit of a standard across industry. Yeah.
So it started about 11 years ago. Would you say it's just now gaining traction, or would you say it's like in the early phases still of gaining traction?
Yeah, I think it's becoming, I said, it's a mandate, a federal mandate within government right now. And so as a result, it's huge in government, and it's one of our big verticals.
Yeah.
But now it's becoming also a requirement within enterprise for anyone who does business with the federal government.
Right. Which I'm in DC, so I'm in the epicenter of that federal government business. So
yeah, so if you talk to anyone related to cyber, they will be aware of the mandate which came out from the Biden administration a couple of years ago.
Yeah. No, I've certainly heard of it. I'm not like intimate with it, but let's talk a little bit about customer acquisition, like as it applies to Gigamon. So we've talked about messaging and how simple is better, how analogy is powerful, how humor can be powerful, right? Which I totally agree with. I think the more technical your product is, the more that really applies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's gold in terms of content. I think everybody can walk away just with that and go back to their own websites and their own campaigns and say, hey, how are we simplifying this? How are we humanizing? How are we making it a little bit funny and, kind of using analogy? I love those concepts. It seems to me, so I'm from the school of direct response, right? Like from the school of where that seems a little bit more kind of like a awareness play, like if you're going to do a commercial on TV, like that would be
Yep.
creative, right? So I'm curious about customer acquisition. Like, how do you guys actually get new customers? What role does that style of creative have in it versus like maybe some other styles of creative or ads that you guys are running?
Um, so uh, every company, industry, product is going to be different. And um, ours is a very technical product. It's infrastructure, and so what we found is as I said, we're building the category and the awareness at a high level that we talked about. And that really is just to open the door to have a conversation. And so the question is then, how do you have that next level of conversation? And so we have a tops down and bottoms up approach for our target customer, right? Or our target prospects. First of all, I'll say, and I'm sure everyone knows this, but use data as much as you can to identify your ideal customer profile. There's lots of ways you can do it. We've done an in-house machine learning model that you can buy off the shelf now. Obviously, bring in intent data, right? So all of this, I mean, there's a ton of technology now available to really understand who's your ideal customer profile. Are they in the buying cycle? So assuming you've got that, you've got your identified persona, so you know who you're selling to. In our case, I mentioned tops down is the CISO, and bottoms up is like a security architect, right? Cloud architect, security architect, network architect. So we use different customer acquisition techniques depending on the buyer. So for the more technical individual contributor, we would use broad based campaigns. Would be
LinkedIn.
emails. We go to trade shows, to LinkedIn, right? Get them engaged. We have a whole BDR team or SDR team that follows up, right, on those leads. And so that's kind of the, broad targeted to our global 10,000, which is kind of the market that we go after. It's targeted, but it's, still relatively broad based. For the CISO, we take a very different approach. Um, and that is certainly like for our individual contributors, it's definitely digital, which is involved as part of the educational process, white papers or webinars or things like that. Obviously media and press, we focus a lot on that. That's trying to get to the, and it, trying to get our customers to tell the story. So it's not us, it's really our customers.
Mhm.
But then what we found to be very effective is executive dinners, peer-based panels, thought leadership panels. Uh, so really getting a CISO to like answer the phone, you kind of forget about it. To respond to like a digital outreach, forget about it. So the only way really we can engage with them is through peer-based conversation.
Mhm.
And so inviting them to a panel hosted by, our CISO or an industry CISO,
Mhm.
a nice dinner where they can have a good conversation with peers. That's been very effective for us.
Wow, that's brilliant. Yeah, I've heard of that strategy in terms of like customer advisory boards, right? And usually that applies to customers, but like you'll gather 3 or 4 customers and then also 3 or 4 prospects. That's really interesting. Are these always physical events? Like you're like one time in New York?
Yeah, mostly. So we again, I think it obviously, I my sense is people are looking for human connection again. Following the pandemic, we're still emerging. People will be selective, right? They're not going to come out all the time. But if you set up an event in in a good place. I'll say two things, and this your audience can kind of take this as hopefully a helpful strategy if you're trying to engage kind of a senior executive. So two things. One is, I said, more industry pure base where they have these conversations, right? A dinner, it's on a topic, a topic obviously related to what we do, but it's not about us. It's about
Right.
an industry topic that they care about, that they want to learn more about. There's an expert there, and then they get a chance to meet their peers and have a discussion on this important topic in a nice location.
Yeah.
That's a no-brainer. And there are agencies out there that can help you if you don't have the relationship with those buyers, you can bring them in yourself. There are agencies out there that can help facilitate those types of events. And those are best in person. We do them sometimes virtually, but they're best in person.
Mhm.
The other thing to do is, then it's kind of part of the journey, wouldn't necessarily be the initial part of that journey, but a follow-on is, we found that inviting them and their plus one
Mhm.
to a hospitality event. So whether it be, one of their favorite bands to go to a concert or a sports game, is a great way to continue that discussion.
Wow. So that's a follow-on.
The plus one
Follow-on
is
to
an
them.
important one because, often the things that we'll do are, outside of work hours. And so taking time away from their family. So if they can bring a family member with them, we found that works really well.
Wow. So this would be a follow-on to like the group dinner with a bunch of CISOs. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
thanks for attending that dinner. Now we're going to go to the ball game.
Yeah, we'll continue. Yeah, it's not like on the same day. It's like
Right.
another time.
Yeah.
But like tailoring again to what they like to do, and then that's been very successful.
Wow. So is that sort of a one-to-one thing, like on the follow-on thing? Like for instance,
Well, the following, it wouldn't be quite one-to-one. It would be basically what we do is we'll have a box, and then we'll invite a bunch of customers or prospects to that box for the sports game or a concert or whatever, right? I was in the Roland Garros in the French Open, where we had a VIP box for our customers and prospects a couple of weeks ago as an example of one of these activities.
wow, that's so cool. I mean, that's next level, I think, for most of us. And most of us everybody wants to get in front of the C level, right?
Yeah.
And I think dinners are becoming more and more mainstream, like that sort of dinner experience. But that follow-on experience with the plus one is next level for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you've got this top down, which you've just described. You've got the bottom up, which is like more sort of mainstream. So where does this like simple and analogistic and humorous messaging fall in there? Like, is that just sort of broadcast? Like, are you running that on TV?
Yeah, we're running that. Yeah, we run that. So we run that through our digital agency manages where that goes. But you can be pretty targeted. So I mean, we certainly run things on LinkedIn. You can be very targeted there. But even on Google properties like YouTube, where this video will appear, like our last video was targeted at directors and above at global 10,000 organizations.
Mhm.
So it's directors above in the security, right? So
With the right titles and the
yeah. And so it'd be relatively targeted. And that video got 16 million views by that target audience. So it was very like it blew out. We didn't spend a ton. I mean, we spent objectively, I guess it was a lot, but subjectively compared to the
on
audience
like
and
a
what we're trying
cost
to,
per view basis, maybe it was
yeah,
a
it
little
was
bit
not
shared.
expensive, and it just really outperformed benchmark, which is great, and we obviously hope the new one will do the same. But that's how we get awareness. Then as we engage them, we will have thought leadership content. So again, it's not about us. So this annual survey we do, which is primary research we do to get to 1,000 buyers. We've done it. This is the third year we're doing it. It's becoming kind of a bit of a standard in the industry.
Mhm.
We get a lot of press and media using this as a source of data for articles that they're writing, is a way that we're sharing and we're helping kind of shape the conversation in the industry about some of the challenges that CISOs and as security buyers are dealing with.
Yeah.
And so that's a good example of kind of a thought leadership piece that we do that helps further that conversation.
That's
So,
brilliant.
yeah.
Dude, you guys are firing on all cylinders. I mean, you've got, the top down approach, the bottom up, you've got the, the sort of fun and easy to understand commercials and video assets going. But then you've got the deep level of, like industry data reports that are being cited by journalists and other publications. Like that's a legit strategy, man. Props.
Yeah, I mean, it's always easier and better to talk about these things in hindsight, right? So I don't want to leave your audience with the impression that, we're perfect, far from it. And there are, you know, there are definitely things that, we've done that haven't worked. And I think that's okay too. As an example, um, we, we, um, we decided that because, being around for a while as a company, that our foray into cloud, which started a number of years ago, maybe we would not have the right, um, we needed to make some more noise in the market and kind of have people rethink the brand a bit. And so we created a sub brand called Hawk. And it was really specific around our cloud offering. Um, and I think, I understand kind of our intention around it. Obviously, I was involved in driving that. Our intention was to kind of, hey, think of this differently. You need, like, we're branching into the cloud and the effort there. Ultimately, it didn't work. And I would say part of the reason is that it was expensive to try and create a sub brand. Kind of knew that going into it. The second was it got people a little bit confused. So how is it different than what you already do?
Right.
And so that's a good example of something that we tried and didn't ultimately serve the purpose. And so we decided to shelve it.
No, no, that makes a lot of sense. And that's a good seg. So the last question that I was going to ask you is basically about your challenges, right? Because it sounds like things are going well from pretty much every way that you could think about it. But I know that it's not all wine and roses. I know that there are beneath the surface some of the challenges. So for the interest of the audience that's listening, I'm curious, just like what are those big challenges, and how are you guys going about sort of solving them?
Yeah. So I would say it's about, let's say, balance and prioritization. And I think that the balance for us is we've got kind of, I would say, like an established business that's, you know, growing nicely, but, modestly. And then we got this super high growth, triple digit growth last few years cloud business. And so it's like balancing like an established, $500 million business with a high growth startup. And those require very different things. And so both in terms of approach, uh, and in terms of the mindset that you need. So my team and, the company overall, there's definitely a lot of agility required in kind of switching from established market leader to breakthrough startup.
Right.
And I think that's probably at a macro level, the biggest challenge we have is balancing those two things.
Yeah. So how do you manage that? I mean, because I think everybody in this world has trouble balancing priorities, right? Because there's just so many things to do and only so many hours in a day. Different people,
Yeah.
different approaches to.
Yeah. So it is, I have a kind of a list, 5 things that I ask my team to kind of think about all the time. And one of them, and approaches to take. One, I say, learn to say no. And learn to say no is basically the idea is, I mean, there's always going to be ask, and it's not about being negative. It's about basically it's about a trade-off. And you need to say, so if someone, another part of the business comes with ask and say, hey, we need this, he said, okay, so here's what I've got on my plate. Here are the priorities aligned to the priorities of the business. We can do this, but that means I'm gonna have to stop doing that. And are we all okay collectively with that trade-off? So when I say no, it's not just like flat out no. It's basically a negotiation that something will have to stop if we add something, assuming that we're at full capacity, which we generally are. If we're going to introduce something else as an ask, then we're going to have to stop something else and kind of having that conversation. That's probably one of the biggest things is helping them learn how to say no.
Love that. Love that. Karl, I want to be respectful to you and your time. For folks that are listening that want to learn more about you or Gigamon, where would you direct them to?
So, the company website, gigamon.com, if you want to learn about Gigamon. As far as for me, I am a periodic Forbes contributor. So I share my thoughts about once a quarter there. So that's probably a good place to kind of follow.
Nice. Well, hey, we're going to wrap here. Stay on the line for just 1 minute. I want to get your top 5 either now or later via email. But for everybody else listening, that was another episode of Revenue Driven CMO, and we will see you next time.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us here today. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at revenuedrivencmo.com. That's revenuedrivencmo.com. And hey, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, Web Mechanics will do 10 to 20 hours of work for you for free. Literally no sales calls, no BS. Just give them a problem and they will put a team to work for you for free for 10 to 20 hours. Even if you're already a client, if you're struggling with demand gen, lead gen, SEO, SEM, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, conversion optimization, if you can't get Facebook or Meta ads to work for the life of you, or you can't figure out attribution, Web Mechanics will take a good hard look at whatever problem you give them, whatever programs you put in front of them, and they will give you an objective, informed opinion, plus some advice from 10 to 20 hours of senior level attention. And that's just because you're a listener of this podcast. So I would suggest take them up on this offer. It's ridiculous. Go to revenuedrivencmo.com/free, fill out the 2-minute form, and you will not regret it. Literally zero downside, unlimited potential for growth. So do yourself a favor, revenuedrivencmo.com/free, no hyphens, no punctuations. You will be happy about that decision.